So I will start by saying that I was walking at the rare book in Cincinnati, and I saw, when I go to Cincinnati, I like to spend time in the rare book room. So I took one book and I saw that it was the Ben Sira edition from Venice, 1544. So I thought, and I started to read it. I was interested on the topic, so I decided to do some research. And the lecture is based on my walking in the library and finding this book. So let me start. 8 years after Bialik and Ravnitsky completed Sefer Agada in 1930, a new anthology was also being published by Michal Yosef Ben-Gurion Bredejivsky, called Mimekor Israel. Like Sefer Agada, it was a complete compilation of Hebrew folk stories from rabbinic and post-rabbinic literature. It was originally published in German with the title Der Bon Judis, Be'er Yehuda, and was translated to Hebrew by the author's son, Immanuel Ben-Gurion, in 1939. And this is the picture of Ravnitsky on the left and Bialik on the right, working on Sefer Agada. They started to work on Sefer Agada in 1903, and the first volume came at 1909, and they completed the project in 1930. So, and this is in Michal Yosef Ben-Gurion. You can see on your left, it's the Bon Judas that was published in 1916. And on your right, it's the translation by his son, Immanuel. The anthology Sefer Agada made a strong impression after it was published. It was published many times since 1930. There are 3 printed editions. The last one was published in 2015 by Victor Shinan on your right. And it was a big celebration in Israel when it was published. And there is a beautiful website by Keren Avichai and Sunit, which illustrated the stories. And I want to encourage you and go and take a look. It's a beautiful website. The book was translated into English by Shokin in 1992. Sefer Agada, and this is on your left, Sefer Agada became a very popular gift for bat mitzvahs. On the other end, the anthology Mekor Israel, or Der Bon Judas, was pushed to a corner and is recognized today only to scholars and is barely known to Hebrew readers. The question is why, and what is the difference between the 2 anthologies? Why did Sefer Agada become popular and not Mekor Israel? In order to answer this question, and I would like to start with a short introduction to the story of the printed books as reflected of the social and cultural lives of their readers. And this is an introduction will be good for later on when we will speak about Ben Sira. Until the middle of the 20th century, research questions about a printed book were who, what, where, and when. Analytical research about the book itself. Scholars dealt with the author, printing press, size of the book, how it was printed, etc. However, they did not ask why the book was printed and who the readers are. Starting in the middle of the 20th century, a new era of research opened in the history of the book, Nova Bibliologia, the new bibliology. It focused on the social and cultural history of communication by print. Most of the scholars were centered in France and called their field Livre Society, book and society. My friend Dr. Sklutz spoke briefly about this development in the last lecture in the library lecture series. So I will not expand on this. I will just say that for these researchers, the book is not a single phenomenon. Rather, the book has its own life connected to those who created it and read it. Regarding the author, scholars ask, in what society did he live? What influenced him to write the book? What was his world's view? Why did he print this book? How was he paid? Regarding the printer, how much did it cost to print? What did he charge for it? Why did he want to print this book? How was the book distributed? Regarding the reader, who read this book? What was his social status? Why did he choose to read this book? Was it read out loud, in group, or privately, etc.? All of these questions and other questions that you can ask lead to information that can help us understand the social reaction to the book and can teach us about the society and culture of the period. So with that, let's go back to Sefer Haggadah. In general, Sefer Haggadah is a carefully crafted book. Bialik and Ravnitsky collected and edited stories from rabbinic literature, including the Mishnah, Talmud, Halachic Midrashim, and the early and late Aggadic Midrashim. As the editors mentioned in their introduction, and it's here, their methodology was to present the rabbinic literature in a positive way. That they translated the stories into modern Hebrew. They did not include mystical stories or stories with sexual content. The goal was to develop and shape an Israeli culture by building a Zionist identity based on the positive aspect of the Jewish literature and tradition. They are continuing in the way of the enlightenment of the 19th century, the Wissenschaft des Judentum, Chochmat Israel, by filtering out the undesirable part of the Jewish tradition. If you are interested in Sefer Haggadah, especially the methodology used to shape the social culture, you can read Safi Zeba Iran, זיכרונות חדשים, אסופות האגדה ועיצובו של קאנון עברי מודרני. Conversely, Makor Israel brings the stories as they were originally told, with no or very limited filter. One of the books that was totally censored by Bialik and by the enlightenment of the 19th century is Betah of Ben Sira, a very vulgar text, as we will see. The Betah of Ben Sira is an anonymous medieval text that pretended to be the wisdom of Ben Sira, Mishle Ben Sira, one of the apocryphal books which was not included in the Jewish Bible, but was accepted into most canonizations of the Bible, the Christians' Bible. The wisdom of Sira was known only in Greek, Syriac, Coptic, and other languages, but not in Hebrew until 1896, when Solomon Schechter found a page of Ben Sira in Hebrew in the Cairo Gniza. And on your left, you see Professor Schechter, and on the right, it's the page of Ben Sira from the Gniza. However, the book was known to the Amoraim and the Babylonian Talmud, and they quote from the book many times, just as they quote from the Bible, Kedamar Kra, as the Bible say. The book was lost in the early Middle Ages, probably around 7th or 8th century. To fill this gap, at least 2 pseudo Ben Siras were written, which were books that pretended to be the original and were called Ben Sira. In the Middle Ages, many rabbis like Maimonides in the 12th century and Ritva, Rabbi Yom Tov Ashvili in the 13th century were fooled and thought that this was the text quoted in the Talmud. The text of Betah of Ben Sira dated to sometimes in the 9th or 10th century in the Middle Ages, probably Babylonia. For more about the date and the place of the book, you can read Elias's book, סיפורי Ben Sira, בימי הביניים. Elias brilliantly examines the stories in the Ben Sira text and compares them to the others known and unknown folk stories that were told by Jews and Gentiles in the early Middle Ages. The alphabet of Ben Sira was printed for the first time in Constantinople, Kushta, in 1519. It was a compilation of two lists of proverbs, 22 in Aramaic and 22 in Hebrew, both arranged as alphabetic acrostics, as you can see on your screen. Each proverb is followed by an Agadic commentary. There is no connection between the Aramaic and the Hebrew text. The publisher put this text together. In addition, there were two other compositions that somehow were put together with Betah of Ben Sira, which Elias called Toldot Ben Sira, the history of Ben Sira, and She'elot Nosafot, other questions. So we are not talking about one book that we call Betah of Ben Sira, rather several different works compiled by many people in different forms. So as Elias suggested, we should call them Sipurei Ben Sira, stories of Ben Sira. It is interesting to note that the publisher decided what to print and the definitions of the book, definition of the books. This only recently came to the attention to scholars. The printers actually formed these books by putting various texts together. This is the case for the Talmud, Mikhaot Gdolot, Zohar, and Sefer Hasidim. This is along the lines of what Dr. Sklut spoke about in the last lecture. It was only in the Venice edition in 1544 that the printer decided to call the book Betah of Ben Sira, as you can see on your right, on your screen, and chose the text that we are now considered part of the book. The work has been characterized as satirical, and it contains references to masturbation, incest, and flatulence. The text has been translated into Latin, Yiddish, Ladino, Arabic, Farsi, French, and German. And this is the Ben Sira from Germany, 1542, is in Latin. This is Ben Sira from our manuscript collection at HUC. It's in Farsi, Judeo-Farsi. And this is another manuscript from our collection in Hebrew. A partial English translation appeared in Stern and Mirsky that we will read from today. To understand the book, let's read a few paragraphs from the book that are representative of the text. I want to warn you that the book is not appropriate for all audiences. I give it an R rating. And so let's start reading from the book. And this is again from the translation. It's from David Stern and Mirsky from their book Rabbinic Fantasies from 1990. 1 minute.
I'm sorry, I forgot to make a note before Yoram started speaking that he's a little bit under the weather. So everybody please forgive him if he needs extra drinks and his voice is a little scratchy.
I'm sorry, Bill. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's very hard for me to talk because
you're doing great.
So let us start a little bit in reading these stories. Again, they are very vulgar stories. So let us start. How did the sages of blessed memory explain this? The phrase, who does great think without limit, refer to all the creations in the world, while the wonders without number, v'niflaot and mispar, was said about those three persons who were born without their mothers having slept with a man. These were Ben Sira, Rav Papa, and Rabbi Zera. All three were perfectly righteous men and great scholars of Torah. How did their mothers give birth to them without having intercourse with their husband? It is said that Ben Sira's mother was the daughter of Jeremiah. One day, Jeremiah went to the Beth house and found wicked men from the tribe of Ephraim, who he saw were all masturbating. As soon as he saw them, Jeremiah began to admonish them. They immediately rose against him. Why did you admonish us? You will not leave this place until you join us. Leave me alone, cried Jeremiah. I swear to you, I will never reveal this. Did not Tzidkiah see Nebuchadnezzar eating a hare? They responded, and swear to him by the divine decree that he will never reveal it, and yet he broke his oath. You will do the same. If you join us, fine. If not, we will sodomize you just as our ancestors used to do in their idols worship. In fear and dread, Jeremiah compiled. As soon as he left the Beth house, though he cursed his day, as it is said, cursed be the day on which I was born. Usually we refer this verse for the destruction of the temple, not for this story. As for that righteous man's semen, the drop was preserved until Jeremiah's own daughter came to the Beth house, and it entered her vagina. 7 months later, he gave birth to a baby boy who was born with teeth and with fully developed power of speech, etc. So again, you see how vulgar this story is. And it's very strange why someone will take a story, the figure of Jeremiah, as he is a prophet and is a holy prophet and one of the great prophet in the Bible and also in the rabbinic literature, and really destroyed this character by this story. And more astonished that someone printed these stories. And the question is why? So we have 3 stories. This is the first one. So I want to see how much, so maybe we'll read we have time to read these stories. This is a second story about Lilith, and Lilith mentioned in the Bible briefly, but here the figure of Lilith really become developed. Let us read. After God created Adam, who was alone, he said, "It is not good for man to be alone." He then created a woman for Adam from the earth, as he had created Adam himself, and called her Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight. She said, "I will not lie below." And he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top." Again, they are fighting about the position during sex. For you are not fit only to be in the bottom position, while I'm to be in the superior one. Lilith responded, "We are equal to each other, in as much as we were both created from the earth." But they would not listen to one another. Again, very vulgar story. The last story that I want to read, it's about Nebuchadnezzar. First, Nebuchadnezzar asked him how he had shaved the hare's head. With the lime solution, Ben Sira answered. Of what kind? Ben Sira replied. A depilatory solution of lime, composed of lime and arsenic. Solomon used his wisdom to invent this solution in the days of your mother, the queen of Sheba, Malkat Shva, when she came bring gifts to Solomon in order to observe his wisdom. He found her very attractive and wanted to sleep with her. But Solomon discovered that she was very hairy. So the conservative Mefarshim or explained that she was hairy in her leg. But in some of the manuscript, they mentioned that she was hairy be'otomakom in the pubic area. He took lime and arsenic, minced the lime by hand with a knife, crushed the arsenic and mixed them together in water, and so made a depilatory solution of lime. When he smeared her with the solution and bathed her, the hair fell off. He had intercourse with her right away. And she said to Solomon, I did not believe all these things until I saw them with my own eyes. Again, a very, very vulgar story. So, 1 second. I'm sorry, 1 second. It is not surprising that the text was shunned by many rabbis, and especially during their enlightenment. For example, the Maimonides Rambams in the 12th century, in his commentary on Perek Chedek, writes, Ben Sira was a person who composed books that contains foolishness and matters of akarat panim, of daily life. They do not have reason or a point except for wasting time with vanities. Yaakov Reifman, one of the first scholars who studied the book, wrote in 1873 in the journal Carmel that the book is so disgusting that it is a mitzvah to burn the book on Yom Kippur that falls out on Shabbat. The outcome of and purpose of this research, and I quote, is to discredit the book so it is no longer read. Even Shaul Lieberman, in his book שקיעין, wrote, לא נחשב מעולם ספר זה המלא ליצנות וניבול פה לספר בר סמכה, וכמובן שאין לחשוב בשום אופן ספר זה כקדוש. This book, which includes foolishness and vulgarity, was never considered an authoritative work. Of course, one should not consider this book holy. Despite the vulgarity of the book, it was extremely popular in the Middle Ages. We have more than 100 manuscripts. As I mentioned before, it was translated to many languages, including Yiddish in 1610. And again, as I mentioned, it was first published in 1519 in Constantinople. The book also published in Eastern Germany, as we saw before, and also in Venice, 1544, and again in Constantinople in 1580. It means that it was published probably 6 or 7 times in the 16th century. To demonstrate how popular this book was, I would like to share some statistics from Shifra Baruchson's book, Books and Readers, Sfarim Vekorim. In Mantua, Italy, on August 27, 1595, the Pope Clement VIII ordered Jews to bring all their books to the Inquisition building to be examined. The Jews brought huge quantities of books to the building in a short period of time. The censors could not handle the volumes. Therefore, the bishop issued a new order to take the books back and write a list of the books that were owned by the Jews in any language. He said that this list should be provided to the censors within 30 days. The Jewish community was also asked to pay for salaries for the censors. The censor could go into any houses and check the books based on the list and confirm that the list is correct. The Jews submitted their lists at the end of October 1595. To our great fortune, these lists survive and are still available to be seen in Mantua. This is a great find for scholars who can now see what books were owned by Jews and learn about the social context, how many books people had, what they were reading, to better understand the culture of the community, etc. The list contained 430 private libraries, households, and a total of 21,142 volumes of 1,234 titles. The medium was 50 volumes per library. With respect to Ben Sira, 17 families had copies of this book, or 4% of the families. These families came from all levels of the society, from the cook, millionaire, tailor, and the rabbi. While this may sound small, Mishnah, for example, was only in 13 households. Sefer Hasidim that Dr. Sklut discussed the last time, which was a very popular book, was owned by 27 households. This shows how popular Ben Sira was in Mantua at that time. To clarify, we are speaking about the early years of printed Hebrew books, when publishing was costly and labor intensive. How is it that one of the early printed books was Betah of Ben Sira? Who would read this vulgar book? To answer this question, I would first like to discuss the Jewish attitude toward the transmission of text. I cannot go deeply into the complexities of the transmission of Jewish texts in the Middle Ages. In any case, many scholars pointed out that the rabbinic texts, especially the Mishnah and Talmud, were transmitted orally probably until the 9th or 10th centuries. They were transmitted orally for hundreds of years after they were composed. Professor Malachi Betarie pointed out that from the Dead Sea Scroll, the 2nd century, until the 9th or 10th centuries, we do not have any Hebrew manuscript at all, but we have around 1,600 Latin manuscripts written in the same period. This comes to show the importance of oral transmission in Jewish history. Folk stories, which are anonymous and with unclear sources, are complicated to trace, especially since they came to us in many different versions. This is the case of Betah of Ben Sira, which came to us in many versions, as we see from the manuscripts that we have. The manuscripts that we have are different from each other and differ from the printed versions. versions. We have a tremendous number of manuscripts of Betah of Ben Sira. As I said, there are over 100 manuscripts that we know of from the 10th to the 16th century. To put this in perspective, an average Masechet of the Talmud would have around 5 or 6 manuscripts from the same period. The incomparable number of manuscripts show us how widespread the folk stories of Ben Sira were and how each community told versions of these stories fairly. In his book, Orality and Literacy, Walter Ong notes that the Jewish community in the Middle Ages transitioned from an oral to text-based society. As part of this transition, the role of the manuscript was that it was read publicly. Therefore, we can imagine how widespread these stories were to the listeners in the Middle Ages. Since these stories were so popular, the Betah of Ben Sira was among the first stories that were published. To give legitimacy to these vulgar stories and to give them authority, they were told and printed in a rabbinic styles. It's not exactly rabbinic styles, it's not the same language, but it's very similar to rabbinic style, like the Midrashim. Even though they are vulgar, readers will feel that the stories are part of the tradition. This is part of the genius of the tellers or the editors. In conclusion, I would like us to remove the illusion that the Jewish books of the Middle Ages were all rabbinic and halachic literature. Rather, one of the earliest and most popular books was Betah of Ben Sira, which was the Jewish medieval version of 50 Shades of Grey. These folk stories were passed on from generation to generation and met the desire of the people for Pulp Fiction. In every society and in every era, there is similar literature that meets the popular demand. We need to be aware of the vulgar voice in Jewish. We need to be aware of this vulgar voice in Jewish literature. So thank you.
Thank you, Yoram. I had the benefit of actually getting to read and help prepare these materials, so I have a little bit of background on this. Our first question, somebody wanted to know the relationship of the story of Jeremiah to the origin stories of Jesus. And was this a parody of some sort that was supposed to be mocking?
A very good question. So I don't want to go deeply to this story, but yes, Israel Levy wrote an article in the 19th century and about the relationship of Jeremiah, Ben Sira, and Jesus. But yes.
So that was intentioned. Okay, so we have another question of comparison. This one is from Jordan Cohen, and he wants to know how this compares to the Midrash Aseret HaDibrot, which is also considered a transitional entertainment work.
Yes, but it's not vulgar. And this is the big difference between Aseret HaDibrot to our, to Betah of Ben Sira. Aseret HaDibrot is a legitimate text that there is no vulgarity at all compared to this book. Again, my focus is why people will read and especially print this book, especially they printed so many times in the first century of the printing press. And especially because his vulgarity.
So Joe Strass asks, the local rabbis were they unaware of these vulgar books, or were they not able to ban them?
Good question. I didn't want to. So the rabbi almost really rarely quoted from this book. So
but they didn't have the power to outlaw it.
They could not. Again, you cannot find again the mass of people. The printer houses know that there is a good demand, but the rabbi, I don't know if the rabbis were against printing this book, but the rabbis barely mentioned the book until the last 50 years. So it was barely mentioned.
So I have a question, unlike folk tales, that you have from Hans Christian Andersen or whoever, Grimm's brothers, those folk tales are part of the tradition and then they get passed down. But I'd say that the majority of these Ben Sira stories are not known to the Jewish population. So why did these fall out of vogue? Why aren't these something that everybody attending this lecture has heard before?
I'm sorry, again?
So my question is, why, if these were folk tales that were so widespread throughout the Jewish European communities, why did they stop becoming so popular? Why aren't these things that have been passed down until the present generation?
Because they are vulgar. So especially during the Enlightenment, that people really fought against this. So I think they stopped to be popular probably in the 18th century, because I see few rabbis mentioned here and there the stories, but after after the 18th, mid 18th century, especially in the 19th centuries, nobody mentioned the story really. Again, I think because the vulgarity of this book.
So maybe vulgarity became no longer part of the trend. We have a question here from Jordan Finken, our rare book librarian. I'm going to ask him to unmute himself so he can ask on his own self. Jordan, are you able to unmute? Jordan, I think you're unmuted now.
Yeah, I'll just read my question. We have evidence that obviously there was a popular book and it was read a lot. We don't have evidence, I can't tell from your talk yet, though, about how it was actually read. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about entertainment. So there's a lot of there's a lot of information about other scatological literature in Europe, the Fabliaux,
Yes.
Rabelais.
Yes.
I'm curious both if there's a literature, secondary literature in the Jewish arena on that particular type of subject, and is it possible that it's a literary genre that's piggybacking on this European interest? That is to say, that is it taking a folk posture but becoming a literary genre in a European context? Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's just the top of my head, but it struck me that there are some parallels that are,
John, an excellent question. I don't know. But I can tell you, since we have 100 manuscripts, and again, it means that it was very popular, and we have in many, many languages.
That was actually one of our questions. Do you know if it was published in Ladino? Since that was I'm going to mess up the pronunciation, the lingua franca in the Ottoman Empire.
It was. I know about. Do you know? I think yes. I know about manuscripts in Ladino, but I don't remember if it was also printed in Ladino. But manuscript, definitely, we have the manuscript in Ladino.
Are we finished attempting to answer Jordan's question? We have one more from Dahlia Marks. Dahlia, I'll ask you to unmute if you'd like to ask yourself, and then I think that will be our last question for today.
Yoram, thank you so much. This was so interesting and enlightening. My question is, why do we even need to presume that such a, radical, vulgar, as you call them, sexual texts are something that are not part of the culture, right? I think in many culture, you're talking about the high culture and low culture. So you had the, high rabbinic texts, and you had the folk tales. And I actually think the question about the Midrash Eser Divrot is actually in place, because it's not so sexually vulgar like the text you were discussing, but it's also, all these stories that are not, high rabbinic, more, So it seems to me like it's maybe fair to assume that it exists in many cultures, that you have all kinds of types of literature in front of you.
Yes, thank you, Dahlia, and thank you for joining us, even that it's late in Israel. Yes, and this is what I say, it's in any culture, in any society, in every era, we have this kind of pulp fiction, but the vulgarity, and believe me, I did not quote I didn't bring the most vulgar and disgusting stories from Ben Sira. There are really, I could not, even in the Talmud or Midrashim, you do not find this language. The language is so strong and so direct that I'm not aware of a book in one place so vulgar in the Jewish literature. So do you know about other texts that it's really similar to this?
Go ahead, Don.
Maybe not in the amount, but in terms of quality, you have stories in the Talmud where rabbis are comparing their penises, and you have saucy stories all over. Maybe not in this kind of concentration, but it's not that it's completely unprecedented, or maybe I'm wrong?
But I agree with you, but it's not in one book. It's so vulgar, and it's but again, the point that I wanted to say that it was so popular, and why people printed these books many times.
Well, it's entertainment, right?
Exactly. This is what I want to say. I want to say that
studying Maimonides is serious, but reading these texts is a lot of fun.
Yes, I want people to remove the illusion that the Jewish book in the Middle Ages were only rabbinic and halachic literature. There are other voices in the Jewish literature that should be considered, and this is one of them.
Along the question of it being for entertainment, were there any illustrated editions of Ben Sira?
There are some, not, if you want a graphic illustration with naked woman, you should go to Tzena Arena.
Duly noted.
But not, we have, I showed some in the picture in my PowerPoint, but no, not graphic one.
Okay. Do you want to take another question or two?
Yes, yes.
We're wearing you down. There's a question here about also the language. Is the Hebrew language more direct than English? I guess, does it sound more appalling in the Hebrew than in the English?
Yes. Yes.
And do we have any evidence of women having read these texts? That is a question from Dr. Meyer. So
in the list from Mantua, it appears that 2 women own this book.
So single women.
What?
So they were single women. You're saying they had their own libraries.
I don't know. There's at the beginning of the, or in the end of the list, there is they mention the name, their they mentioned the name, so we know that there were two women on this book, but I don't know.
If this is a representative sample, and that's a significant portion.
But I don't know. Probably my assumption, I don't know.
Okay. All right. We're going to let you go because we don't want to overtax your vocal cords. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And of course, thank you to Yoram for this very interesting lecture. We encourage you to check out the recording and share it with your friends. And we do want to thank our corporate sponsors. If Edgar, you can pull up the last slides. That's the US Bank and the various corporate partners who helped make programs like this possible. And they're all available again at huc.edu/HUC-Connect. And please like and share this with all of your friends and relatives. Thank you again for joining us. And we'll see you at our next series, which hopefully will be in the late summer or early fall.
So thank you very much. Thank you for coming this afternoon. And if you have a question, you can email me. Thank you.